Hello and welcome to Study Room. This is Prataksha, your geography teacher, here to discuss the fifth chapter with you, named Industries. This chapter would have a reiteration of some of the concepts that we have already covered in the previous chapter, that is chapter 4, Agriculture. In this chapter, I'll be taking you through some of the important sources of industry. What are the sources of industry, such as agro-based, such as marine-based, such as forest-based, and the different types of industries. We'll also be talking about the different factors that depend where an industrial setup would be installed. Also, I'll be taking you through some of the important cities and the different and the major industrial setup that those cities have. With that, let's get started with the chapter. In this video, you can see how an industry is being set up. Different locations are being explored. Okay, a location which has a favorable supply of water, where the terrain is smooth for the installation of various machines, that location is preferred. Then also it is checked that whether the raw material is available nearby and whether an easy transport system could be made available. Also, then the kind of labor that is required, the kind of capital and the power that is required. It varies from industry to industry. Textile industry would be requiring different kind of labor. Food industries would be requiring different kind of labors. So all of these factors depend where an industrial setup would be installed. So let's explore these different slides. In the first part, starts with secondary activities, and if you remember, we have already covered this concept in the previous chapter. The three processes or the three activities in an economic setup that involves a primary activity, that's the procurement of the natural resources or the raw materials, then that resources are then carried forward for certain processing, for certain you can say modification, where it is tailored and curtailed for our human use. That all of these activities occur in the secondary process, right? And tertiary activity involves the transport, the trade, all those factors that are there, that are required so that that final product reaches you in that in your nearby market, right? So if you remember, I had given you earlier the example of bread, right? How in the first process, in the first activity, you get you sow wheat plants, wheat crops, you harvest them. Then in the secondary activity, that wheat is processed to get bread, and in the tertiary activity, where that bread is transported towards your nearby market, where you can go and buy them. Same goes here in the industrial setup. We can take the example of paper, for example, that we get paper from trees. So the first activity would involve the cutting down of trees, procuring of that important logs of wood that will help in the process of paper. Then the secondary activities would then involve transformation, or rather the modification of that wood into wood pulp, into paper pulp, right? And then that paper pulp is further modified to get those thin sheets of paper onto which the lines, margins, or if it is a book, then all the printing that is there, it is printed on it, and that print is based upon the ink. That ink is further based upon some chemical ingredients that you'll be getting from another secondary activities from some other industry, right? And the final product that you'll be getting would be your paper, where then it will be going to the tertiary activity, for example the trade, for example the transport, so that that particular piece of copy or paper or book or whatever it is will be transferred and available to your nearby market, right? So this secondary activities involve all those processes, all those methods that make possible of making or transforming all those raw materials into the final products that we human use. All right. Industry, therefore, is concerned typically with this production of goods, right? With this modification, with this process, all those methodologies that are used for the production of goods, all right, for the extraction of minerals, or provision of services. Provision of services is seen in the tourism industry. Production of goods is seen in other industries, for like paper industry, like food industry, like iron and steel industry. Okay, and extraction I'm sorry, extraction of minerals. In extraction of minerals, we see the iron and steel industries, right? And other important metals that you get, non-metals that you're getting, right? The graphite, that graphite that is there at the nib of your pencil, right? So all of these things are we are getting from the mineral industry. Okay, for in the production of goods services, we are getting paper. We are also getting food industries. Okay, and we're also getting textile industries. So industrial activities therefore can be broadly divided into these three parts. Nevertheless, all these you can say all these activities are concerned in the economic area, are concerned in this secondary activity, in this secondary process. In the previous chapter, again, if you may remember, we had talked about the primary process, the first process, right? Agriculture was all centered around how you will be procuring those materials from nature, be it plants or be it animals, and then that could be further, transformed into the required product, into the final product through the secondary activities, right? In this chapter, we'll be focusing our discussion uh, in this secondary activity. Now, industries could be classified into various types. There are different classifications. The first classification that we will be studying is classification based on raw materials. Depending on what raw materials you are getting, okay, different industries have been set up. For example, marine-based industries have been set up where you get important sea products like sea foods, okay, also the fish oil that you get. So all these industries have been set up where the primary products are transported, and where these primary products are further processed so that you can get your that tinned or that canned seafood, or you can get fish oil or other also medications that we're getting from marine based animals or plants, right? Aquatic plants, aquatic animals. So all of these activities are taking place in this marine based industry. Then, in the mineral-based industry, we'll be talking about iron or steel-based industry, because this is the most common, and the usage of this industry is the most, you can say, dominant one. Okay, so for example, from iron ore we are getting iron, right? And that iron is further being processed. Further, you can say metals or non-metals are being added so that you're getting steel. Okay, and then how this iron or this steel is further used into different industries as a raw material. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is that iron and steel industry, this mineral based industries, is being involved actually in the production of products that you'll be getting during the secondary activity, right? But in typically when we're talking about iron and steel, the processed form or the final product that we're getting, be it iron or be it steel, is actually getting used as a raw material in other industries. For example, in automobiles, for example, in vehicles, right? All of this usage I'll be talking about when we will be discussing about iron and steel industry. So heavy machineries, or you can say in vehicles, etc. We are using the final products that we are getting from these industries. Then forest-based industry is used for getting paper. It is used for getting important medicines or pharmaceutical companies derive a lot from forest based industries, right? Also furniture, because we're talking about wood. Okay, so furniture, all right, this we get from the forest based industries. Agro based industries, you must be familiar, because the primary activity of this particular industry we had talked about in detail in the previous chapter. Okay, so in agro based industries we are getting food products, right? So food processing industries are involved in agro based industries, and in food processing we are getting wheat plant based foods, or wheat animal based food, right? Like milk, right? Like eggs, like meat. Okay, then apart from food, there is also textile industry, that is agro based industry, and it is also, after iron and steel, one of the leading industries all over the world, right? So all of this you are getting, it is classified in the agro based industry. Okay, then there is also classification based on size. The previous classifications that we looked through, those were based on raw materials, right? Where you're getting raw materials from marine, where you're getting raw materials from forests, etc. Here we're talking about size, the second classification. Okay, now depending upon people or labor, okay, depending upon labor, depending upon capital, and depending upon the quantity of the final product that you're getting, that you are finally processing in this secondary activity, right? So quantity, Okay, depending upon all these factors, we can determine whether an industry is small scale or large scale. Okay, usually in small scale industry, we have pottery industries, we have weaving industries, not just cloth weaving, like you see here in this picture. Women are there and they are involved in the tailoring business, right? But not just cloths. We can also talk about basket weaving. Okay, pottery, etc. Also what some text, not all of them, but some textile industry could also be situated into the small scale. Certain food processing industry could also be situated in the small scale industry. Textile based, if you're talking about country wise, majorly it is large scale, but some textile based industries such as silk, okay, those people that do not have a large amount of capital or a large amount of labor, but they are still involved in some textile activity. Okay, and that textile industry could not be just limited to different power based machines, but it could also be manual labor, like you can see here in the picture. Okay, so depending upon the kind of labor and the kind of capital that you're using, and finally the kind of product that you are finally processing. Okay, so if there is a small amount of labor and a small amount of capital is being invested, and you're not procuring a lot of quantity or a lot of final products, okay, then that industry would be small scale. In large scale industries, huge capital is being invested, a lot of labor is getting hired, be it in the form of man-made labor or be in the form of machine labor. So technology, when you talk about all the kind of technological advancement, okay, all the kind of machineries, all of that would be coming to the large scale industry. Okay, then quantity, if the product that is getting produced in the secondary activity, if the product is extremely large in volume, then you are talking about the large scale industry. So all the automobile industry, or the heavy machinery based industries, all right, all of these are there, all of these are involved into the large scale industrial business. Okay, then the third classification that we will be studying about is based on ownership. Means who are the group of peoples, or who are which is the government, okay, that is having an ownership over this particular industry. Okay, so you can see here there are four types of ownerships, right? There is public sector, there is private sector, there is public sector, then joint, and then finally cooperative sector. Private sector, like you can see it, you can logically infer the meaning that a group of individuals, or sometimes even one single individual, so individual or group of individuals, they have an ownership over a particular business, and when that happens, we say that this industry is a private sector industry. In public sector industry, a government is having the ownership over over a particular industry. So the example of a public sector industry could be Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. Okay, then if you can infer here by the name itself, joint sector involves the amalgamation of both government as well as a group of individuals. So if both the government and some individual people, they are coming together and they are forming you can say a collaboration or a sector, and then they are owning and establishing an industrial setup, then that particular ownership could be said to be joint sector based. So this is state plus individual. Okay, state plus individual, and the example could be Maruti Udyog Limited. Okay, these examples are also there and listed in your NCERT book. Then finally we have the cooperative sector, where the people involved are either producers or suppliers of raw materials. All right, and the example could be, if you have heard about Sudha Dairy, it's one of the famous dairy business setup or industrial setup. Okay, so all of these, the ownership, the people who own this Sudha Dairy or this cooperative sector, they are actually producers, direct producers or direct suppliers of raw material into that particular industry. So these are the four types of industries based on ownership: private sector, public sector, joint sector, and cooperative sector. Now, we were talking about the factors that are affecting the location of industries, right? So, first of all, raw material. Based on raw material, we have already seen different industries: agro-based, forest-based, marine-based. So, depending upon what kind of raw materials you are getting, a particular industrial setup is installed. So, for example, if you have the raw material of textile, like cotton, like silk, so you won't be, installing all those machineries that are involved in marine-based industries, right? So depending upon the type of raw material you'll be using, you have to install those particular machineries related to the processing or manufacturing of that particular raw material. Then the power that you'll be using. Okay, some industrial setups require a huge amount of power, some may do not require that huge amount of power. So you have to assess, this power based, you can say, condition. Where are the areas where you can get easy supply of power? Okay, then land. All right, if a particular industrial setup requires a leveling of land, right? So where are the particular those areas where you'll be getting a very smooth or a very plain terrain? Okay, then transport. You have to see about an essential network of transport, right? Because if some processing, you can say, activity is going on, then of course there has to be an import of raw material and export of the finished product. So a transport should be very, very efficient. Okay, then communication between the owner of the companies and the different employees. A strict communication, a very, you can say, advanced, or rather comprehensive communication should be there, so that the work that is the input that is being put up, the output, you're getting that in the desired quantity, in the desired quality, and also on time. Then labor, amount of labor that you use, that you need. Is it man-made labor? Is it also machine-based labor? So depending upon the industry, small-scale industries, large-scale industries, you can also classify the labor that you will be needing. Also capital matters the most, right? Because if you don't have the capital, then how will you be installing machines? How will you be procuring labor, or procuring the different transport network? Okay, or how will you be going upon what power supply do you need? So capital is very, very important. Okay, then market, because after you have finished processing the final product, you have to sell it to the tertiary industries, to the tertiary activity of that industrial setup, right? So you have to sell it to a particular target audience, to a particular target market, right? So you also have to keep in mind of market. Then water, because water is a very, very important attribute of an industry, right? Different industries need water for coolant. Some industries need water for dissolving of different chemicals, right? For the processing of various products. So water is also very, very important. So these are the factors that affect a location of a particular industry, right? And with this, we can finally come to a setup of the industrial system. So if you may remember, in the previous chapter, we had talked about a farm setup, right? Where we had talked about how you will be sowing seeds, that will be input, the amount of the kind of seeds that you need, money for those seeds, then important machineries, tractor, bullock carts, all of that will be coming under input. That the processing was spraying, winnowing, harvesting, everything, and the output was the final finished product that we'll be getting after harvesting. So similarly here in the industrial system, the input requires all those factors basically that we just studied in the previous slide. Let me here. So raw material, power, land, transport, communication, labor, capital, market, water. You have to consider about each and every of these factors, because all of this would form the input, right? This is all that you will be considering and you will be incorporating when you will be installing an industrial setup. The processing would require and would consist of all those activities that would be required for the finishing of that raw material, right? So processing such as for example, if we were talking about paper or bread, right? So all those important processes that need to that particular wheat crop or that particular wood needs to go through, so that that final product is getting to you, right? For example, here in this picture, if cotton is the raw material, it is the input along with other infrastructure that or other factors that I just listed out. So the processing would involve spinning, weaving, right? Into yarn, spinning into yarn, then spinning into that fiber could be then made into a cloth fabric. Okay, then that has to go through certain dyeing processes, all of that. So all of these processes, so the final product that you get, the output that you get, is the t-shirt, the shirt, or whatever fabric it is that you are wearing, right? So every industrial system includes the use of inputs, process of manufacturing, and finally the output. All right. Then here is a question in the form of an activity. Find out the inputs, outputs, and processes involved in the manufacture of a leather shoe. So for the input, naturally the raw material is leather, so you'll be needing leather, right? Then you'll be needing what kind of labor you have, okay, and what kind of capital you'll be using, okay. Then what else? What kind of power costs would be required for the finishing of the final product, right? Then the processes would involve certain transformation of that raw material into that leather product, right? So tanning, okay, and crusting. All of these are particular jargon involved in this leather industries, all right. And finally, the output that you'll be getting, it would be the leather, okay, but the leather in the form of the material that you need it for. So if you need a shoe, a leather shoe. If you need a belt, a leather belt. If you need a bag or a wallet or a purse, so depending on that, leather bag, wallet, purse, so whatever it is. So these are the kind of inputs, processes, and finally the output that you will be getting out of this leather industry, okay. Then there are various industrial regions that are, you can say, spread all over the world, right? So industrial regions emerge when a number of industries, they're located close to each other, so that there is a network that is being formed, right? So if you will here, look at this map, okay, you'll figure out that eastern part of North America, I'm abbreviating it here as NA, eastern part of North America uh, is very close to close how via a sea network, because there is the Atlantic Ocean in between. So via the seaport, via various seaports, via the sea network or sea transportation, eastern part of North America and eastern or also central part of Europe, okay, is or could be considered as an industrial region. Then depending on this logic, the eastern part of Europe, see the map, eastern part of Europe, western part of Asia, or also the eastern part of Asia, because there is no ocean between Asia and Europe. There are lakes, there are rivers, but the transportation is easy because there is land, more or less, right? So the transportation of materials or an industrial setup, an industrial region between the eastern part of Europe and eastern part of Asia is also very possible. So all of these are located depend on the proximity of various industrial areas. Okay. Then industrial regions in India, there are different belts or different areas that favor all those factors that we had enlisted in one of the slides previously, right? So location, power supply, raw materials, okay, transportation. So everything is being considered, and after its consideration, you're getting several belts. Okay. So for example, towards the north, you have the Gurugram Delhi Meerut belt. Towards the west, you have Ahmedabad Vadodara belt. Then towards a little bit towards the south, Mumbai Pune belt. All towards the south, you're having Kollam Thiruvananthapuram belt towards the Kerala side. Towards the Karnataka and the Tamil Nadu side, you have the Bangalore Tamil Nadu belt. Then a little bit towards the Andhra Pradesh, you're having Vishakhapatnam Guntur belt. Okay, then towards the eastern part, you're having Hooghly belt and the Chota Nagpur plateau region. So these are different areas of distribution. Okay, related to the proximity of each other, where a certain industrial network, a certain industrial channel could be developed, right? And if you will notice that all of these are mostly located in the temperate areas near the seaports, because there are certain climatic conditions also that you need to keep in mind. Okay, temperate areas favor usually the flourishing of an industrial setup. So near seaports, why? So that there is an import and export of import and export of raw materials and finished products. So there is an import and export happening. That is why it's near the seaports and especially near coal field, because coal is a very, very important ingredient. Not exactly ingredient, but since we are talking about raw materials and industry, so I could use the word ingredient over here. So coal fields, because coal is a very, very important raw material, okay, that is supplied in various industries. Okay. Then finally, industrial disaster, Bhopal gas tragedy. Now, all of the industrial activities that are going on, people should be very, very careful about everything, right? Because a single slippage could result in a certain disaster. A similar incident happened in Bhopal, okay, on 3rd of December, 1984. In one of the industrial areas, a poisonous gas, isocyanate, which is also known as MIC, that gas leaked out along with other products. Some of the other product was hydrogen cyanide. Okay, so this poisonous noxious gas along with hydrogen cyanide and other reaction products, it leaked out of this particular pesticide factory of Union Carbide in Bhopal. And this was so noxious, so lethal for everybody that it killed about 3,598 people. And those people who survived this tragedy had various impairments. Some got blind, some had various internal damages, right, that they could not possibly come out of without using external help, okay, required to maintain their system. All right. So with all of these industrial processes, okay, especially talking about the processing part of this whole industrial system, right? So there is input, there is processing, and there is the output. So usually there is not much harm or not much disaster that occurs during the input and the output part of the system. But in the processing part, because there is certain reaction going on, right? Certain chemical reaction mostly. Not just in the pesticide industry, but also other industries, there is certain, because whatever input you are taking, you're basically changing the attributes of that product and you are rendering it to to get to obtain a certain product that you will be using. So it's all man-made intervention, human intervention, right? So a certain chemical reaction goes on and we have to be very, very careful during that processing part. So there are certain risk reduction measures that are taken. So the industrial area and the residential area should be separated, all right? An industrial setup should never be on such an area where a residential setup has already been there. Okay, industrial area should also always be on the outskirts of a particular city. And even there, where a number of population is living, all those people should be aware that what kind of industrial setup is this, and if a particular accident occurs, then what are the measures that all of us should take care of, and what are the measures that all of us should be performing, right? And in case of a fire or something like that, there should be an improved fire warning and fire fighting system. Okay, then whatever toxic substances, like we just saw in the Bhopal gas tragedy slide, that toxic gases come out, right? So whatever toxic substances are there, the storage of that toxic substances should be proper, and there should be a certain limit towards it as well. All right. And finally, improvement of pollution dispersion qualities industry. So if there is water pollution, air pollution, noise pollution, whatever pollution that particular industry is attributing towards, there should be a certain reduction and there should be a certain improvement, a certain, if there is air pollution, that then the poisonous air should be filtered before all of that air exhaust is going out of the chimneys of the industries. If there is water pollution, then the water should be treated before being discharged into the water bodies. And if there is noise pollution, then certain absorbent techniques should be taken up so that there is an improvement towards that area, right? So these are the things that you had to learn in this part of the chapter. That was the first part where we saw what an industrial setup is, what are the different kinds of industries, and what are the factors that are taken up when you consider an industrial setup. All right. And different kinds of industry based on different factors, right? So depending upon your raw material, depending upon your you can say labor or capital, and also depending upon the ownership. All right, then various factors, and finally risk reduction measures. In the second part of the chapter, I'll be talking to you about the distribution of various industries, and you can say the processing, how certain industries take up the processing part of their system. Okay, so thank you for staying with me here, and I'll meet you in the second part of the chapter.